Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Human SOS Show. We're on episode 141. Been rocking long, and wow, we'll be up on 3 years here shortly. Invite you to join us, and as you join us, to be sure and let us know where you're joining from. And as always, we want to hear your comments, your questions on the topic because you are the one that makes the show the best. So join us, and we look forward to having good discussion. So, Anton, you want to set us up for our topic for the day?
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining. As Kevin said, please let us know where you're joining from. He's really good at giving shout outs, and we just love to know where our audience is tuning in from. Today, we're going to talk about agile leadership. Before we dive into concepts of agile leadership and what are the different components of it, I want to talk about why that's important. One of my personal stressors in life has always been make grandiose plans, create all the PowerPoints in the world, do all these big plans, and then only execute part of it because the world has shifted, the environment has shifted, things have changed, and now we have to redo it. And it just gets frustrating after a while. And that's a big stressor on many employees to this day today, where leaders are expecting people to have this waterfall approach where one thing comes after the other, and it's just not effective, especially in modern world where everything's changing so fast. So agile was developed a while ago, or 20 years ago, and I think an agile manifesto was written in like 2001, and it came around from software development and the different way of doing things versus having each piece be complete before the next piece starts being built. It's about multiple things moving at the same time and running things in short sprints. And that allows you to be agile, right? That the word agile means you're nimble, you're quick to respond, quick to move, those kind of things. And unfortunately, even though we've developed the Agile Manifesto, we've been using lean methods, Sigma Six, you name it, we haven't really done a great job adjusting the leadership mindset to match that kind of way of performing. So we are going to talk today about different concepts that leaders need to do in order to be agile. And we want to start out first with I want to name off the four main areas that you have. The first area is going to be explore. And that's where you give teams ability to explore new ways of doing things, new solutions, teach them collaboration, things like that. Then comes in disruption, right? And that's going to be disruption thinking. It's going to be putting yourself in the mind of the customer and seeing what kind of other things they need done. Then comes in the plan, right? And then comes in the execution. And they all have different components on what they are and how to do them. And we'll talk a little bit about each one today. Kev, just want to know what are your thoughts on agile leadership in general?
Well, as you mentioned, we've got to be agile in the current environment because things are moving so fast, changing so fast, and that inability to adjust it can be very problematic. And the other thing I think of as you were talking about the difference in mindset, I think part of the what works against the use of agile leadership is the fact that we are still very vertically organized in our leadership management structures. And agile leadership is more effective in more of a horizontal structure in an organization because it's, again, you mentioned the idea of the waterfall effect. That is more with a vertical organization versus a horizontal organization, and the ability to even adjust during execution. That I think is key, and it's really interesting that we in the military have been doing this a long time. We get our plans, we make very good plans, but we go in ready and even have pieces in place to immediately start adjusting. And that's what we're trying to get into the marketplace, is being able to adjust even with a great plan.
It's interesting you mentioned, vertical aligned teams, and agile leadership can't happen if a leader tries to maintain control over everything. It's all about building self-sustained teams and trusting your people to execute things. Of course, you're still leading. Of course, you're still involving. It's just very different. It's not about barking orders. It's about more facilitating, right? You like to talk about three styles of partner, right? Partner was a partner, facilitator, and commander, right?
Commander, partner,
And
facilitator.
oftentimes we think about leaders are all about being commanders. They're providing direction. They're doing all that, but it's not true. Best type of leaders are partners. They're partnering with their people, and they're creating freedom of expression within them, and they're bringing them forward by allowing them to bring themselves forward, make mistakes, and do all those things and correct. So it's all about self-sustaining teams, and in order to make a self-sustaining team, the first step we talked about was explore. But in order to even begin to explore, you have to help people to feel safe, right? That's the number one step that many people don't focus on, right? We have a show called Human SOS here that you guys see every week for the last almost 3 years, and it's all about the human. Agile leadership is still all about the human. It's not about your reports. It's not about your PowerPoint. It's not about your plans. It's about helping people to be their best self, contribute their best skill sets, and self-govern as much as possible. And that cannot be done if you don't have psychological safety. We've talked about that, specifically before, on your team. What are your thoughts about helping people feeling safe, Kev?
First, let me give a shout out to Rick and Cools. Appreciate your being here today. Hope you'll jump in and add your perspectives on it. One of the concepts that I teach in leadership is called leadership and group dynamic. And one of the key components to getting the most effective group function is that the group feels secure. And how you go about establishing security in your group or safety in your group is very definitely a process. It's not something that you just kind of let happen. There are components to it. And if you really want your team to be able to function at their full potential, then having that secure or safe environment is very, very important. And I have to say that we need to understand that we're not talking about what has somewhat become popular, talking about safety zones. It's not about that. It's about clarity in your culture, clarity on your team, clarity in your values for your team, and those sorts of things. And then the other part of it, though, is as you get those clarities in those areas, then the willingness to let go. And one of the best positions to be in with a team that is secure and functioning as a team is to move into the role of a facilitator. And that is, a facilitator leader is very hands off. They have prepared the situation, the environment for people on the team to be involved, and then they go about facilitating what occurs. And when you see it happening, it's amazing. In fact, one example is when you see any kind of a team in sports execute well. What's happened is they have worked as a team to come together. They've worked on the different basics, the core things, the core values. And then when it comes time, most of your best coaches at that point take their hands off. They let the team run the game. And when you do that, obviously there's risk because they may make a mistake. They may not do it the way you think. And but you've got to empower them to be able to execute and step back and be prepared to step in if needed. But most of the time, you should be hands off, letting your team do what you have gathered them for. Now, there's a caveat to it. If you've not chosen your team well, you got a different set of problems. But if you've chosen your team well, that's when you step back and you watch them do what they do and do it very well. Welcome, Z. Glad to have you with us, and appreciate that. So, yeah, safety, security, that is such a key part of the environment or culture of the most effective teams. That's got to be there.
It's interesting. I first had experience truly working in an agile way. Now, folks, let me remind this. I am not a software developer, nor have I ever done software development. So when I say working in an agile way, I'm not applying this to developing software. I'm applying this to project management, to creating consulting services and things like that. And I was blown away, and I really fell in love with it, because one of the things about agile leadership is it's not about rank. I was on a team with, managing directors and, people that are 3-4 levels higher than I am. But we were working in a way that I could make comments and correct them or present ideas different than them. And it was welcomed with open arms. It wasn't like, these leaders had egos and they're like, oh, who is this junior person telling me what to do or correcting me? It was welcome. Everybody had a voice. And that was one of the best experiences I've ever had. And that's what, made me fall in love with it. Rick says all places of work need a good point guard or QB. True. But what's interesting in that way of working, it's not often the leader. It's a scrum master. And scrum master is not necessarily a high ranking position, right? We had a scrum master, and that was my peer that was leading a team because they had skill sets for it, right? They were drivers. They were on top of things. They were able to push daily meetings along. They were, or they were doing great reflections and things like that. And it was truly amazing. So absolutely, Rick, but it's not always going to be the, top dog, top leader that's going to be doing that. So next piece, now that we got the team feeling safe, we don't want, like you said, if we hire poorly or we don't train them, it's going to be bad. We want to create a culture of learning. So that's really the two things that are going to help us to explore that first concept of the 4 is feeling safe and learn, because then you can contribute new things, new ideas. That's what it's all about, that ingenuity that agile methodology can bring.
Welcome, Sharon. Glad to have you with us. And Sharon reminds us this is Valentine's Day. Happy Valentine's Day to everyone. And hope that it proves to be a good day rather than a hard day for you. But yeah, it's really remarkable when you see that type of culture and how it works. It is, having been, if you will, the QB or point guard on a team, and going from that to that from being a commander, the shift is remarkable, and the shift is really good, and it makes your role as the point guard or QB much better, because it allows you the freedom to, rather than control things, to then influence things as it unfolds. And that, for me, even though it's not based on my normal or dominant leadership style, once I ever discovered it, I go, wow, I always want to be in this role rather than as a commander, which is my default leadership style. And so if you ever experience that agile leadership and the effects of it, it's really remarkable.
No, it's very true. And it's interesting, like no matter how smart the leader is, no matter how good they are, you could have the most brilliant leader in the world. They're never going to be as good as a group of people working and thinking in unison, right? It's like, you think about a really best computer you can buy out there, Mac or whatever people are using. It's never going to be as good as 6, 10 great computers, maybe not the best ones, but good ones put together in a network and working together. And that's what our minds are. They're amazing computers. And we got to feed them with learning. So now we've created that explore phase, right? Started with that culture. And the funny part is I often see leaders try to skip it and go straight to disruption, right? They're stepping into a room and they're going to become agile, and they're going to their team. How are we going to do disruptive thinking? And nobody's saying anything. Well, you didn't create psychological safety. You didn't get people learning. And now you're trying to get straight to them providing ideas, feeling comfortable to do it. That's not going to work. So in order for you to disrupt, you've created those first two, and now you're moving into disruptive thinking. And there's many ways to do disruptive thinking. One of my favorite things to do and why I love to be a generalist in business is because I can take relevant concepts out of different areas of business and see, okay, well, this is how these people did it. How can we learn from it? How can we do something in that similar way? It doesn't mean we're doing the same thing, right? We're just looking at a concept and going, I can disrupt my industry by matching how this industry looks at something, or how they seek performance measurements, or whatever, what their OKRs are, you name it. There's so many different ways to do it. But that is one really good one, is looking at neighboring industries. A lot of times you hear people talk about a lot of disruption happened with business when people were looking at NASCAR teams and how they worked and what they did, right? Like, what can business learn how to put tires on the car? But lots of teamwork and things like that happened from those examples that people were able to take away and bring into business.
The key concept there, and this is what we talk about so often in all different areas, is as you look around, you don't want to look and mimic. You want to figure out the principles involved, and then take those principles, not the actions, not the attitudes, none of that. Take the principles that are being applied and then overlay them in your situation. And that's such a key. In our culture, we spend so much time mimicking rather than finding the principles that have been applied and then take those principles and use and apply them in our situation. That's so different on so many levels. From a motivation level, if we try to mimic what others do, we may have people that we're expecting to do things that is not in accordance with their design and purpose. And that creates a problem. Whereas if you take the principle and say, okay, the principle of, for the NASCAR example, one of the principles of changing the tire is having the right tools, okay, and having them readily at hand. So that's the principle. So how do you take that principle and apply it in different environments? If all we're talking about is physical positioning of tools and physical positioning of people, we're missing the point of the principle involved to make it how they work effectively. And we don't need to be mimicking, but we certainly need to be learning the principles that are being applied in other situations.
Mm-hmm. And think about disruptive thinking. It's scary. I mean, you're asking the kind of questions, or like asking yourself to do things that you've never done before, or have never been done, period, in the world before. I know he's not loved by many because, he's definitely eccentric, but Elon Musk is one of my favorite people in modern era who comes up with, who comes to my mind when I think about disruptive thinking. He goes and says, okay, how can we do this 10 times faster? What? 10 times faster? Are you kidding me? Right? Like, it just seems insane. We've always done it this way, Elon. Like, we've always had this kind of result. How do you expect us in the next year to do it 10 times faster? It's not about the exact number of 10 times faster. It's about now taking everything out of your head and trying to reconstruct it in a way to, how can we even possibly try to get there, right? Just to start to explore the idea. And he always throws out challenges like that to his teams, to his companies, to himself. And I love him as an example when it comes down to that. So definitely want to have disruptive thinking, and you have to get away from we've always done it this way mentality, which so many leaders are still stuck in this day. There's so much untapped potential on our teams, and in the way we do things. But if all we do is say, hey, we're hitting our numbers, we're going to keep doing this. I'm like, but that number is based on what you've done in the past. That number is not based on your potential, your business potential, your team potential. It's based on what metrics you decided were possible. And now you're trying to just create some 10% growth. Why not do a 10x growth, right? Like I think another one is Grant Cardone is another example of that, like who just tries to blow up the idea of revenue generation and things like that.
Well, and what's key, and I see this happening, and I think it goes to the idea of not mimicking, and that is we think, okay, disruption is primarily born out of action, not initially. Initially, like you have mentioned, disruption is about the way we think about things. And unless we have that as a foundation, trying to have disruption just for the sake of changing something is likely going to not go well. Welcome, Karen. Glad to have you with us today, as always. So, yeah, you talking about jumping ahead, but you've got to get a disruptive mindset and the thinking process of disruption before you start taking disruptive action. Because if you don't have the background foundation of thought with your disruptive action, first time that something comes up challenging it, or maybe something goes wrong, you've got to go back. We did this disruption, didn't work, without having the thought process in the background. If you got the thought process, hopefully at that point you've already considered what could go wrong. That's part of disruptive thinking.
Now, one thing I just want to point out, because I know that a lot of our audience is not necessarily, business owners or have large teams. Some are, some aren't. Think about this, but think about your families, maybe your parents, right? Think about relationships and stuff like that. Because leadership with parenting are very, very similar. But we still parent very much with this autocrat, this like commander style leadership. And it's not always the best. Now, I'm not saying you should never use commander style, because there's sometimes when, things are going crazy and we just need quick actions. That's fine. But think about applying some of these ways to your family, even if they're a grown family, right? Even if they're, your kids are pretty grown. You have many grandkids now. Think about like a vacation planning or any of those kind of things, and apply these methods, and it may open up your eyes to how you can do things a little bit different. So, whether it be your customer, whether it be your family member, the next part that's part of Disrupt is customer vision, right? It's really putting yourself in the shoes of your customer, which all businesses have some form of a customer, and really focusing on what are their values, what are their, how do we engage them, and becoming just obsessed with understanding their needs. Instead of coming in and having this cookie cutter solution of like, hey, you got this problem, we got this solution, right? That's not how Agile works. That's just an old school waterfall method again. It's really coming in and looking at the uniqueness of every situation, uniqueness of every customer, and then doing all the previous steps that match their uniqueness, right? And that finishes up that piece of disruption.
Well, and a key thing you mentioned so important is finding the customer's vision. Well, one of the things that is got to be a part of that foundation is having clarity in your own vision as a team, as an organization, because that will help you understand, is there going to be a good relationship with that customer? If you've got very different visions as an organization from your customer, there's a good chance that you're trying to set up a relationship that's going to fail. And so having clarity in your own team vision, organization vision, whatever level you're working at is important, so you can then identify and see if you can relate to your customer's vision and their need and so on, and get away from this, well, if we do enough odd percentages, we're going to get a sale out of people. That I appreciate that, and I know that's been around a long time. But if that's our mindset, we're going to get stuck, and we're not going to adapt to our circumstances and to our customers.
So now we've created, exploration. Now we've created disruption in our teams. Now it's time to plan, right? It's the third area of agile leadership. And this area is very, very important, just like anything else, but it's very, very different from most people think. It's not about having everything figured out. It's not about having every piece outlined. Less is more because you have to move fast. So in order to do that, you need ruthless prioritization. And what I mean by that, being able to look in the current moment and say, you know what, these 5 things that we started working on last time may no longer be the best thing for us because, one of our teammates brought it up and said, look around the corner, this is what's coming up. And you can't be trying to push, all these people, maybe spin plates. You can't be spinning too many plates at once, right? And you have to say, these are the most important plates to spin for this customer situation in this moment of time. And that's what we're going to focus on this week. And then we will reevaluate and see what else needs to be done in the next weeks. Most Scrum teams operate in sprints, if you've heard that term before, and they're usually 1 to 2 weeks. So they create a plan to do something and complete it in 1 to 2 weeks. So they break up things into small increments of that and they prioritize. And it's not about, PowerPoints. Once again, it's something that I deal with all the time. There's lots and lots of PowerPoints. It's not about that. It's about deliver the information the fastest way possible, focused on the human without waste. Because if you have waste and a lot of waste, you can't prioritize well because your resources are being tied up by things that are not the most important. So you have to teach your team to prioritize, right? It's not just about you prioritizing as a leader. They are on the ground executing this, and you need to help with that prioritization.
Well, and it's interesting, something that I learned early on, and it was part of the incubator for my understanding of application of leadership. And that is one of the best ways to remain agile is a good plan. Okay. Key point, good plan. Most of our plans that we try to make, we're looking for 100% accuracy in our plan. And before we move, it's called perfection, and it's ineffective. Again, I go back to military because military of its very nature has to be agile in its leadership, especially on the ground. And for in the military, we don't wait till we got all the details perfectly figured out to execute, to act on the mission. We typically use a concept called 70% solution. You get to a point, you've got a plan, and like you said, Anton, the plan may be only primarily thought and considered for 2 weeks out. And you start executing based on that. And then as your mission unfolds, as your project unfolds, then you are in a constant cycle of evaluation, or as we call it in military, reconnaissance, and then adjustment to the mission. And that's how you remain agile, because if your whole thing is, well, we're going to go 100 yards ahead and establish a hold there, and that's all we do, and we find out that somebody's coming from behind us and we're not adjusting, we got a problem. We're going to be defeated. Whereas if we have a good plan at a appropriate level and begin to move forward with it, we then are ready to move, but we aren't so tied in that we can't adjust as we move along. And so 70% solution is a very effective way to approach it. And the 70% may be a time frame. It may be a project completion level. I don't know, different ways, but don't go into it thinking you got to have a 100% effective, perfect plan to start executing. Because if you do, you're going to get disrupted every time.
Or 70% means truly 30% of the things we could be doing, we're just dropping to the side because we don't have the time, or it's not our priority right now. And in a waterfall kind of environment, right? Waterfall planning, you do all of them because they're all important. but they're not prioritized, and we're wasting resources. And then the second part of planning is performance improvement, right? So you create these prioritizations constantly, and then you work with your people on performance improvement, both in team coaching and one-on-one coaching. Coaching is very, very, very important in agile, way of working. Agile leaders know they need to be great coaches or employ great coaches. If you are not naturally a great coach, you can improve somewhat, but you're going to be burning up your team and wasting time. Hire people, hire Kevin, hire different folks out there, hire agile specialists, because they are going to help you a lot to make this team be working together so well that it makes outputs 10 times of what you could have thought of yourself as a leader.
Well, and one of the things I want to cue in on, because this is a big concept about leadership, is that these principles, the concepts of leadership, aren't just for people with the title of leadership, whatever that is. I even have done an article on called Accidental Leadership, because we've got a lot of people that are in roles of leadership that do not have the title of leader. And you mentioned one, parenting. These principles are valuable in any role as a leader, but parenting, teachers is another one, because I've really hoped to help teachers view themselves as leaders in their role, not just an educator per se. So as we talk about it, don't think this is only for people that have a leadership title in a corporate or organizational environment. It works so well anywhere that you're going to be functioning as a leader, whether you have the title or not, or whether you think of yourself as a leader or not. So don't think this only works for those with the title.
It's interesting you bring up teachers. Such a good topic to use here. My daughter is going to be my middle one's going into middle school, and I am so tired of traditional education. No offense, to anybody out there if you're in that world, but it really hasn't had a refresh in forever. It's the most waterfall thing out there, where they have these concrete subjects, they have concrete way of teaching them, and they keep doing it over and over and over. And I'm just thinking, like, what if we had an agile approach to school, right? We revisited, obviously sprints would be shorter, but we revisited every year. What's the most relevant thing people need to learn? And we tailored education to that. We created some self-learning for students. Imagine if we started kids early on teaching others and doing all that kind of stuff. Think about the power behind that. I would pay a lot of money for my kid to go to a school like that. And I just don't see them very often, right? There's newer education schools, but of course they're not agile. But that would be an interesting concept to explore.
Well, I'll try not to get on my soapbox, but I tell you that the real core of education hasn't changed in probably 60 years. And it's unfortunate. We're talking first industrial revolution kind of mindset. So a couple of comments from our audience here. And Z, I have to agree with you from a priority standpoint. Most important leadership position or title is indeed parent, because that's part of the reason we have the challenges we have in our cultures today, is that parents are not being leaders in their in homes and environments. So thank you for that. Any comment on that from you, Anton?
No, I live it every day. I believe it. I mean, biggest influencers on my life are my parents. So I think that's the case for a majority of people. Not everybody. Some people have had rough parenting and whatever it may be, but you can have bad leaders and good leaders. They're still leaders.
Yeah. Let's see. Cools makes a comment, says coaching to deliver as agile leadership. Yeah, coaching is a good perspective on leadership, because ultimately, and I throw this one out, that real leadership, and in order to be an agile leader, one of the things you've got to do is be a servant and approach it with a servant leader mindset, because part of the challenge is that A servant leader understands that they aren't going to control everything. They have remarkable influence, but not control. And if you don't have that as your foundational mindset, you're going to struggle with being an agile leader. I really believe that fully.
Yeah, and that influence doesn't come from position, right? That's where people get it wrong. They feel they're influential because of their position, and I forget, maybe Andy Stanley, but Leading Without a Title kind of book. It's the best leader because they earn it every single day. They earn the right to lead, not because they've been appointed to lead, but because people follow them because of how they are treated, how they help them overcome things, how they serve them, and all those kind of things. And that's what leaders need to be doing, especially in agile environments, is think about how can I earn to lead every single day.
Right. And one other point, servant leadership period, got to start with us leading ourselves. We are the place that we practice it best. And when we are approaching leadership ourselves in an agile way, it is much more effective ultimately. And as I was just thinking about it, Anton, I think that's another reason that 10% works well. Because if you're approaching leadership of yourself with 10% approach, you remain more agile to adjust and adapt as you go along individually. So.
And it's that ruthless prioritization, right? That's the concept of what is the 10% of all the possible things I could do that are going to be most impactful, most effective, most sustained, whatever the priorities are, and you're spot on.
And then go to the next 10% as it comes along. Yep. Let's see. Z's got a comment. Says, education. Look how they start pushing back on Chat GPT. Can you imagine this attitude years ago with the internet or even the printed book? I can't imagine it. I lived it. Okay. I have walked through, even as an educator, I walked through part of that period where we began to consider, do we need to do away with a hardbound printed books for education? And the level of pushback was amazingly bad.
Well, how are kids supposed to memorize stuff if they don't have a textbook to do that? Because our school's still just memorization for the most part. It's interesting. It's interesting. Brings up Chat GPT because you don't have to memorize anymore. It's like it's Google search, but way better, way more tailored to the question and response. And it just shows how outdated memorization is.
Yep. And it's ineffective with so many. A great amount of the population that has gone through our education system built on memorization have not done well, not because of they're incapable, but because they are not effective memorizers. But if they are taught or learn a concept where they don't have to memorize it, but it becomes applicable or relevant, they'll learn it well and probably learn it better. Well, not just probably, they'll learn it better and it'll endure. Because part of the problem with the education system, we're afraid of taking breaks right now because what we've memorized will fade versus what we learn. And it's a different thing. So
teach me how to find the information and when to apply it. And that's what's more important, right? Like, I don't need to be able to pull it out of my back pocket every second. I can pull it up on my phone. I can, just access to information is so limitless right now that we need to teach people how to think versus what to think all the time. Right? Well, we're so focused on what to think and the process of memorization that we're stifling growth for kids and adults, same thing.
And prioritization is way off, because if you look at what young people need to be effective in the current marketplace and what education prioritizes, it is so misaligned that it's really, really sad. So let's see. Z's got Z's got a couple of comments. Another point about the education methods is the product of stagnant system that will go to a work environment that is an agile and on movement always. The friction would be most high in the workplace. I think. Well, how do you take that comment, Anton?
Yeah, so he's saying that you have non-agile education,
Yeah.
that you're
Okay.
trying to pair it with agile way of working, and it's friction. Absolutely. I mean, if you want agile way of working, but you're going to have a hard time correcting some of the ways people got used to work, doing things in school, right?
Right.
And of course, there's going to be friction, and that's why agile transformation is not easy. It's a cultural shift. It requires the whole organization to do it, and it starts with the leader. Today, we're just talking about how the leader has to think and what mindset they need to have. But the reality is, it is not an easy transformation, folks. We're looking 2, 3, 5 years to truly become an agile organization.
Well, and part of the reason that the education system creates this friction is because of the concepts of learning. And again, learning in an agile environment is very different. It's not about picking up some knowledge and then applying it just as it is. It's about picking up some knowledge and then going, okay, is this relevant? How does it fit? How can it be used? And it's very different than picking up some knowledge to answer the questions on a test. And so, yes, there is going to be friction. In fact, we're seeing it on a lot of levels currently.
You said an important word, test, right? And I think that's one of the biggest issues with our education system is standardized testing. That's where the funding comes from. That's what people teach to. That's where your grades, everything's coming from that. Well, if it's standardized, guess what? We're just perpetuating the same cycle.
Yeah.
There's a group of concepts we have to know, and we're going to test everybody against the same concepts, irrelevant of their situation, irrelevant of anything in life. We're going to keep doing that because we need the state to give us money to pay us more so we can pay our teachers, we can have nicer things and things like that. And the whole system is just flawed. It just, no matter what you can do, no matter how much you teach teachers, until you change that, right? Until you stop tying performance to very specific things that are super outdated, we are not going to get away from it. And then that in itself is just not agile.
Right. And in fact, it's kind of interesting that finally there's some people catching on to this in the business world and beginning to think about this and look at it, because we got to make a change. And so far, there's so much resistance, both systemically and from a mindset standpoint, that it's unfortunate. But let's see. Z's elaborates further. Says my point of the book is about the original printed book. Before the printed book, people used to copy books by hand. Education back then might raise the point of how handwriting would go bad, so we don't need a printed book. Oh yeah, again, we throughout history we've seen plenty of evidences of non-agile thinking and how that it affects things. Part of it, and something that Anton said, priority. We get to a point we're prioritizing things that should not be priority. We haven't identified the core concepts, the core values that are important, and then opened up the door for everything else to be challenged and questioned. And that's where it's become a problem. And it's unfortunate. And what I don't think a lot of people realize is how pervasive it is, and not just the business world. I mean, it's pervasive throughout. Let's see. You have a comment on that one, Anton?
No, just I was going to say Rick's got a comment.
Yeah, I'm going to bring that one up. Until we decide to return to basic learning, education of our youth is fruitless. And I think what Rick's alluding to is returning to what is essential priority, and everything else needs to be reevaluated. What is the essential priority? So anyway, I think we got on a little bit of a rabbit trail there, Anton. Pull us back.
I like our audience engaging and letting us know where they're at. So we've talked about the first three, right? We talked about exploration, we talked about disruption, we talked about planning. And as much as people think planning is the most important, it's the execution. One of my favorite things, I don't know if it was somebody else's quote, I think I came up with it, but I'm sure you heard it from somebody else, but 50% perfect, 100% perfect plan with 50% execution is never going to beat a 50% perfect plan with 100% execution. The math, I get it. You're like, wait a minute, that's the same math. Well, that's the point. It's not about math. It's about people's drive, about people's care. It's about the ability for them to use their brains and use the collective input versus just, having this perfect plan and just driving it. So, that's the last piece is execution. And first part of it is agile decision making, which really, really, really is important. But in order to have agile decision making, just like in anything else, we need crystal clear role clarity. People need to know their roles, what their responsibilities are, what they do, right? Within an agile team, you have very specific people doing very specific things. You have coaches, you have scrum masters, you have people that are doing execution, all that kind of stuff. So role clarity is priority number one for your agile decision making.
That's the key. And we talk about this so much, knowing your team, putting people in the roles that they are best suited for based on strengths. That we have a undercurrent, even very pervasive undercurrent, that we're supposed to be, and by the way, this is part of the problem with education, that we're all supposed to be very well-rounded. Okay. And I appreciate have some well-rounding, but as human beings, we're not designed to be everything for everybody all the time. We're designed with very specific skill sets and very specific, unique qualities. And if we ignore those, we are not going to be effective in execution. Because we put I'm trying, you put someone that's a creative thinker and you ask them to write the plan, you got a problem. They are not going to be effective on so many levels. The only mitigator in there is how determined they are to satisfy whatever they've been asked to do. But much more effective, you put a creative thinker in doing creative thinking. And the person that is better with writing the plan, let them do that. And when we begin to do that, then our teams come together, because then they're complementing each other, not competing with each other.
And it's so important to put people in their strengths, and it's not about their roles. It's not about their titles, right? A lot of times somebody that is, you come on a team and you have 6 to 8 people on a good team, and the leader would never be a note taker. Why not? If they're the most attention to detail person and they're the ones that are going to take the best kind of notes in that meeting, let them do that. Or you as a leader step in and do that, because if your other people are a little bit better at maybe macro thinking or something else, or navigating people, whatever it may be, it needs to be based on strengths, not based on titles. And unfortunately, that's not the case in most places. So next piece is going to be team empowerment, right? So still in order to have good agile decision making, you have to empower your team to make decisions. If everything flows through you as a leader, that's not going to be an agile team. You don't have the speed of decisions necessary to move in agile ways. It's going to be, everything's going to be basically bottlenecked at you. You're going to be the thing that always has to push things forward, or they're going to be waiting to get an answer when they need an answer yesterday, right? And you have to empower them to make decisions. You have to empower them to make mistakes and be okay with it, because guess what? If they make mistakes from that, you go back to one where it's okay, feel safe to make that mistake, have them have the psychological safety to be there, and then make sure that, encouraging learning, and then back to the decision making. Cool. It wasn't a failure. It was a temporary setback that you learned from. Hey, look at what you got out of it. Good job. Let's do it again next time and celebrate it.
It might be interesting, Anton, and somebody may have done this, but to look back over history at the military leaders that would have been agile leaders versus traditional waterfall, and see comparison. I think that maybe we should work on a book on that, Anton.
One of many we got to rate.
Say what?
I said it's one of many we have to rate.
There you go. There you go.
But yeah, no, it's interesting. But really, it's empowerment. Like I think at the core of agility is empowerment. You have to empower your people to do all these things, to express opinions, to lead, to drive, to you name it. And yeah, I think that's a good way of seeing it. They may have not used the word agile, they may not have all these same terms and same things, but these leaders definitely empowered their people and allowed them to make decisions, make mistakes, learn, and be okay with it.
Well, and I recently added a quote to my list of quotes, and I'm more understanding of this, and that is attempt at leadership without relationship is dictatorship. And the key there is relationship, and it's through relationship we empower people to do what they need to do, because empowering someone involves letting go, not trying to hold on to control. And there's also a trust factor. Like you said, trust because they may fail. And it's not because they're bad or anything else. It's because part of growth and learning involves failure, not complete failure, but failure in situations. And that's how we are effective in learning. And if you don't have a relationship as a leader with your team, it is going to be very difficult to have that trust factor and that willingness to let go of that control. And because of what we see a lot in the current business environment is we have, again, managers that are trying to function as leaders, and they don't know how to have the proper relationship with their teams to be able to let go, to trust and empower and allow room for failure. And that's a real problem area, especially in your frontline leaders or mid-level leaders, because that's where the execution has to occur. And if you're not empowering, your execution is going to be stymied all the time.
He brings up a comment. Is it military leadership being transactional style leadership? Often is. You're right. It often is. But in the best performing units, it's not. If you look at SEAL Team 6, if you look at, Green Berets, some of these super high performance teams, they are not transactional leaders. Everybody has a voice. Everybody has input. Everybody contributes. Very collaborative way of working. It's not just about one person saying, this is how we're going to do it. The closest person to the problem with the right expertise is the one that's going to be helping to come up with the decisions and things like that. And everybody plays that role at different times.
Well,
at least my experience with it.
Yeah, I can speak to recency on this, that the military is shifting in its approach. Yes, there is rank structure of necessity, because when things break loose, you got to have some structural support. But from day-to-day function, more and more, military is moving away from transactional leadership to a empowered leadership, and the core of it is getting away from depending on authority to get things done versus influence. And in the military, there's a major shift going on. I was in a 10-month school about 3 years ago, and it was a upper level leadership course in the military. And the message there was lead with influence rather than lead with authority. And so it's shifting too, because, the military, one of the things about the military, especially when you get involved in fighting, learning and improving is very important, because the other side has learned and improved. And if you can't do it as well, you lose. So.
And the other part is you have to have best information possible to make decisions. And if it's all it is one person at the top of the mountain that's
Yep.
giving that information out, it's not going to be the best thing. It's whoever sees danger, whoever sees, whatever's coming, they're going to say it, and everybody needs to be listening and responding to it. Otherwise, lives are going to be lost. But old school, yes, I still think there's a lot of telling there, especially the bad military leaders that have been there forever and they got promoted because they've been there forever. It's still very, very much alive. But the stuff that Kevin's talking about, I've been out of military for 14 years, and we still were learning those kind of things back in the day. I hated using my rank. People always have to call you by your rank and then your name. And many of my peers came up with me like, no, don't call me by my name, by my rank. So, but they still made me, and I was Sergeant Chewy instead of Sergeant Chuma because at least it softened it a little bit for my friends. Got to keep my nickname. So, all right. So, last piece of this, agile leadership within Execute is collaborative achievement, where you really focus on cross-team collaboration. You're focused on team alignment, and that delivers the best possible product, the best possible outcomes. It's not just about one person owning everything. It's not about one person doing everything. It's people with the best abilities contributing in the best way they possibly can. And that's how you really deliver the best results.
And one of the ways to characterize it may be, rather than having one rock star on your team driving the team, you have a team of rock stars because each one is functioning in their strength and doing what they do well and are recognized and valued for it.
And everybody has a voice.
Yeah. And when it's like that, boy, things happen. Key thing is that we have to be greater than the sum of all our parts. The problem is in traditional management, that's not a priority. The priority is each of us being our part. Whereas on an agile leadership, the priority is how can we as a group, as a team, be greater than the sum of the individuals. When that happens, amazing things happen.
Absolutely. So right on time. This was good hour covered, but why do we talk about this, right? So what is always the big thing, and your people are so stressed out from everything as it is. Don't make this old way of planning be the thing that contributes to them. Unlock the potential of your people by using agile methodologies within your organization. It's not easy. Start small, right? Maybe identify an area and start working on it. Or if you're not a leader yourself, see how you can ask for that to start happening. See how you can, coach from within and be a peer leader versus a title leader and start to transform things like that. And Z, I know you've had some, you've got issues with your leadership and things like that. But do the best you can to make the influence, and then try to find a place that's going to allow you to do it better versus where you are now. Should we do L10 voting? What's L10 voting? Kev?
I don't know that one, Z. You're going to have to clarify that. Either I think we're running out of time for today, but if it's something you think might be a good topic, you know how to get a hold of us and let us know. But I don't know L10 voting. I'm about to learn something, I suspect. So thanks, everyone. Have a great week ahead. Join us next week for the next episode of the Human SOS Show. Hope that you begin to learn and discover ways to be agile leaders. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye. Take care. Bye now.